Hello everyone, I am Jason Alcott. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. You know, I remember having these conversations with my dad, and we would be out and he would say something along the lines of, you can tell the size of a person by the size of the thing that bothers him. The funny thing is that he would always remind me of this when we were out on the golf course. That's when it would always come up. You could tell the size of a man by the size of the thing that drives him nuts or makes him crazy. And it was me, frustrated by this little white ball that would never go where I want it to go. And I always thought that was funny. But it's true, right? Like, what do we allow to bother us? What do we allow to frustrate us in our daily life? And how does that throw us off? And what should we allow to bother us? Or what should we allow to frustrate us or maybe stop us in our tracks? And I want to dive into that a little bit further today. I really believe that this is worth a discussion because if you allow the little tiny things of life, the ups and downs of life, the challenges, the opportunities, all the different things that come across your path, life happens to all of us. But if you're allowing yourself to be frustrated by the little tiny things that happen in your day, then I would imagine that you're living a very frustrated life. You're allowing these things to happen. You're reacting instead of responding and choosing how you respond. And you're very frustrated. I think of a typical day. Maybe you're driving to work and somebody cuts you off. You spill your coffee. You walk into the office or school or wherever you're at, and somebody says something to you that you don't necessarily agree with. Maybe it's a boss or a coworker. And all of a sudden you turn to the person on your team and you'll be like, oh man, it's just going to be one of those days. And I'm going, wait. Hold on a second here. You've only been up for a couple of hours and you've had a couple of things that haven't gone your way. But are you willing to write off the next 20 hours just because the first 4 got off to a little bit of a rougher start? And I'm talking to myself. I do this, where I get frustrated by something and then I allow it to impact the rest of my day and my relationships and my communication with other people in the pursuit of my goals and dreams and what I believe God's calling me to work towards. What really got me thinking about this was an article that I read by a gentleman by the name of Morgan Housel. And he wrote an article called The Optimal Amount of Hassle. We'll include a link to that article in the show notes. And I first heard about the article in a discussion he had with Tim Ferriss on a podcast. Great podcast. But this idea of an optimal amount of hassle. And what he talks about there is that, we all go through life, like we're talking about here, the ups and downs, the challenges. He calls it, the BS of life. And he says you got to find a way to live with an optimal amount such that you're going to be able to go through this sort of messy and imperfect world and not live your days totally frustrated by it. It's not that you can avoid the garbage or the BS of life. You need to rather figure out, well, how much am I willing to put up with to make my way through sort of this messy and imperfect world? I mean, that's what we talk about in these videos, right? Like, how are you responding to the different situations that you come across, the different opportunities and challenges that come across your path? Now, if your tolerance for the ups and downs of life or frustrations or BS of life is 0, like if you have 0 tolerance for that, miscommunications, inefficiencies, whatever like that, you're going to spend a lot of time very frustrated. And I know I have these days where I'm like, man, I just get so frustrated because different things maybe don't go my way or I think that they could be done better. But if you live that way and have a 0 tolerance, you become very frustrated and you're going through life very frustrated, which is not how you want to go through life. That's not helping you to keep your eyes up and open and looking at opportunities to serve and lead people. Now you're just frustrated and focused on yourself. Now on the other end of the spectrum, you can't just accept every inefficiency and every miscommunication and just let it wash over you, because then you become like a doormat. You're not standing up for anything. You're not, standing on your values or holding yourself to a standard. There's things that you definitely need to say, nope, enough is enough. I'm not dealing with that, or this is crossing a line, or this is not okay. There has to be a middle ground, and that's what Morgan calls this optimal amount of hassle. Morgan has this great illustration in the article. He talks about theft in a grocery store. It really helped me to clarify his idea. He says, a grocery store is always going to deal with theft. That's a part of it, right? Like, big open doors, lots of products, they're always dealing with theft. Now, if they wanted to have a 0 tolerance theft policy, they could put a policy in place to basically strip search every customer that comes through their door. But no one would go there, and then there would be no business, right? On the other end of the spectrum, if they just didn't have any security measures in place, then obviously they couldn't function either. So there has to be an optimal amount that they're willing to work with, that they're willing to live with. In this particular case, an optimal amount of theft, which obviously would be as close to 0 as possible. They understand that there is going to be a gap that they need to live within, and they have to set a reasonable amount of whatever that is, theft or breakage or whatever you want to call it, that allows them to function as a business. So this leads me to the question, what's my optimal amount of hassle? What am I willing to put up with to be able to walk through life? And I want to look at it from 2 different perspectives today. On one perspective, I want you to look at the areas of your life where you have very specific goals, things that you're pursuing and driving towards. Let's say that you'd like to become a published author. Okay, so what are you willing to go through to become a published author? Because to become a published author, you need to do things like write every day. And invariably, when you set a goal to do something like write every day, life will happen to try and stop you. The kids won't sleep, rough day at work, you're going to run out of time, the computer's not charged, whatever it is, right? How much of that are you going to put up with and still take the effort to become the writer that you know you're supposed to become. That means writing, on a daily basis, regardless of what's happening in and around your life. You got to kind of define what that is, right? Or just commit to, no matter what, I'm going to write every day. And all of a sudden that's going to, add that up, stack that up, compounding effect, sowing principle in action. You become a published author. But you've got to make that decision as you set up that goal, because it's one thing to set the goal, but you're going to go through stuff to be able to hit it. If your goal is to become a runner or run a marathon, no matter what, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to go for a run today. Bad weather, no sleep, whatever it is, because life happens, the BS, the ups and downs of life is going to happen. What are you going to be willing to go through to still meet your goal? And then on the other side of this spectrum, I believe, is much more about the different areas of your life where maybe you don't have specific goals like becoming a published author, but it's more maybe around your identity. The person that you want to become, the husband that you want to become, the father that you want to become. And in this case, I want you to push and drive in and make sure that you've identified your values and identified your standards for life. Like, I'm holding myself to this standard. And, as life happens and the ups and downs and garbage of life happens, here's where I draw the line where I say, okay, no, that's enough. This is the way that I take care of my family. This is the way that I take care of the people that I work with. Regardless of what's happening, this is how I treat the people around me. You're holding yourself to a standard, but you got to have those standards, right? You have to have defined those values and make sure you know what they are so that you can kind of live in that middle ground, that optimal amount of hassle. You can live in that middle ground if you know what your values are, if you know what your standards are, and if you know what your goals are. And if you can identify those two things, I think you can find a way to sort of live and go through life recognizing that you've got what it takes because God's equipped you to go through the ups and downs of life. So I'd encourage you to think about these questions, to look at this and go, how do I do this? How can I walk through my life knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but knowing that I'm not a doormat, that I am going to be driven and pushed forward towards a goal and towards the purpose that God has in my life, towards the person that I believe God is calling me to become. So I hope you take a moment to click the link and read this article by Morgan. It's only a couple of minutes to read, but I think it's going to challenge you. It's going to push your perspective and allow you to ask some good questions of yourself as you're looking to push towards your goals. I believe we need to find a way to live in that gap, right? Between the gap of, here's what I'm willing to go through to reach this goal, and also to make sure that I've got these standards that are high. I'm so excited for everything that God is doing in and through your life, and I hope you have an absolutely blessed rest of your day, and I look forward to sharing with you and connecting with you again next week.